Today is 9 September 2013. I am interviewing Edward Stanley Schenk at his home in Niantic, Connecticut. The interviewer is Buckley W. Morgan II, working with Central Connecticut State University. Also present is Jan Grosskopf. Ed, can you please state your full name, your date of birth, and the city and state in which you live?
Edward Stanley Schenk, born 17 April 1924 in Bronx, New York.
Where you live?
And I presently reside in Niantic, Connecticut, Pine Grove.
And Ed, in which war did you serve?
Korean War. I am an active participant in the Korean War.
And what was your branch of service?
Army Signal Corps.
Your highest rank when you retired after you did 20 years?
Master Sergeant.
Master Sergeant. Now, can you just kind of take us through, in general, just locations where you served?
Just thumbnail. I took basic training in Camp Polk, Louisiana, 1946. From Camp Polk, Louisiana, I went to Signal School at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. From Signal School, I went to 3rd Army Headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. That brings us to 1947. I was there 3 years. I went there as a PFC and left 3 years later as a staff sergeant. I had a great deal of experience in teletype communications. Was NCOIC of the 3rd Army, NCOIC of teletype maintenance in the 3rd Army Communications Center at Fort McPherson, Georgia. From there, I went to, by way of overseas assignment, I went to the let me back up on that. From Fort Mac, I was levied out for normal rotation to Far East. While there, I got there on the 23rd of June 1950, and 2 days later the Korean War started. And we were there normal processing for service in Japan, but that was all brought to a halt when all of us, except those who were scheduled to go to Alaska, went to Korea. Went to the 2nd Infantry Division at Fort Lewis, Washington. And there were about 1,300 of us. So, and I'd been there, I knew most of by face and by name, a lot of the 1,300 that I went there with. And I was assigned to 2nd Signal Company, and we were already packed up. The Signal Company was already packed up. The equipment was down on the docks waiting to be loaded on the transports. And we had to pull guard duty on the piers because Harry Bridges, Longshoremen's Union, were definitely inclined towards the communists. And we were sent there to make sure, first of all, to assist in loading the vehicles when it came to be, but to keep an eye on things to make sure that nobody put sugar in the gas tank or iron filings in the crankcases of our vehicles, and we had a good number of vehicles. Went to Korea on the USNS Billy Mitchell. And I'm not sure of the date we left. We left sometime in early August, the end of July, but I think it was early August. We went the northern route to Busan, Korea. We offloaded in Busan. We spent the first night in Korea in a wharf on the dock while we got our equipment together and loaded on vehicles and convoyed up the road towards a place called Mariang, Korea.
Now I want to talk more about Korea in detail, but after Korea, where did you go after Korea?
After Korea, I came back and went to the signal school at Fort Gordon, Georgia, Camp Gordon, Georgia at the time. And from there, from Camp Gordon, I went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts for a month or two, and then got levied out for Germany. And I went to the 512 Signal Base Maintenance Company in Pirmasens, Germany. We operated a signal depot repair facility for signal depot. And I completed my tour there.
How long was your tour in Germany?
Well, it was 3 years. I did 2.5. And went back to the States, went back to Fort Gordon, Georgia. And while there, I became a first sergeant of a signal company. And then I went back to the signal school at Fort Monmouth to attend a general cryptographic equipment repair. From there, when I graduated from that course, I went back to Fort Gordon, Georgia. And while there, I was assigned to the signal school at Fort Gordon as NCOIC of crypto equipment maintenance in the signal school's cryptographers course. And
NCOIC being non-commissioned officer in charge.
right. And from there, I again was levied out to the Far East, and this time I went back to Korea again. This is 1962. Was there in Korea, and at the time I was there in Korea, the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred. I spent the 13 months required and went in Korea, and went back to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and was assigned to the signal school, and there I completed the fixed cryptographic equipment repair course, and became an instructor in that in that equipment. And then July of '66, I retired from the service and came back to Connecticut.
Very well said. You traveled around a bit. Do you remember when you enlisted, were you drafted or was you
Drafted, yes.
You were drafted?
Yes.
And you, where were you living at that time?
Groton, Connecticut.
You remember, how did you feel about being drafted? How did you feel at that time when your number came up, so to speak?
I was happy to go. I tried to go earlier, but I didn't go. I worked in the shipyard building submarines before that.
Which shipyard was that?
Electric boat, Groton.
In Groton.
Yeah.
So when you're drafted, were you able to pick what branch you wanted to go into?
No, I wasn't offered that opportunity. But they sent us to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and it was, used to call it branch immaterial. No, it wasn't branch immaterial. It was Signal Corps and Medical Corps. Those are the two, and fortunately, I ended up in the Signal Corps.
Well, did you have to go to basic training before you went?
Oh yeah, I went to basic training. Yeah, I did basic training in Camp Polk and got there in April of '46 and went through basic training and stayed there at Fort Gordon while they figured out what they were going to do with us. Hurry up and wait. And So then, I'm not Fort. I keep saying Fort Gordon. Camp Polk.
Camp Polk.
Camp Polk is where it trained. Stayed at Camp Polk, and then again they loaded a bunch of us on trucks and took us over to the First Signal Service Group, and I was assigned to the 181st Signal Depot Company. And they are the ones that sent me to teletype school up in Fort Monmouth.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit about your basic training. Do you
Yeah.
remember your basic training?
Yeah.
What type of impact did it have on you? Was it particularly stressful, or was it?
It wasn't stressful, but it was how should I say? We had some well, first of all, we had people that did things that wasn't quite right. Like they double timed the company one Saturday morning in the hot Louisiana sun until almost everybody was out, and people were court-martialed for that. And
Oh, really?
yeah, they did things, and it wasn't a very good basic training. We got rifle marksmanship in that, which was okay, but we didn't learn anything about bayonets, or we learned first aid, and we learned all the basic things. It wasn't the best. The war was over, and they figured we weren't going to ever have to do anything like this again, but they were wrong.
Yeah. So it really wasn't very well organized, and no real emphasis put on training.
Mm-hmm. There was a lot on training. We had some. I probably had some of the better company commanders there than I had in Korea. Believe me, company commanders I had in Korea. One of them broke down and was bawling like a baby. And
Well, we want to hear about that when we get on
Yeah.
Korea.
yeah,
Definitely. So after boot camp, you went you stayed at Polk for a while, and
yeah.
then
Went to Fort Monmouth to school. Yeah.
and then from after you finished that schooling, Fort Monmouth, where did you go after that?
Third Army Headquarters, Atlanta, Georgia.
So and there you actually worked in Atlanta, not on a
Yeah, yeah.
base or
Yeah, but I got there in May of '47, and it was really great. Lived in YMCA, which was walking distance, and it was great duty, but it didn't last long because by January 1st of 1948, we were back at Fort McPherson living in barracks. But the time I was in there in Atlanta, I made PFC and corporal, and no, I was already PFC. I made corporal, and we went out to Fort Mac. I made staff sergeant, not from corporal. I went corporal, buck sergeant, staff sergeant, and the master sergeant that was in charge of maintenance, who was instrumental in me being promoted, was made warrant officer, and he left, and I assumed his duties as NCOIC of the comm center. I mean, I thought that was pretty good. Yeah.
And how many years of service did you have at that point?
I didn't have 3 years yet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So from there, what happened? Where'd you go next?
I was levied out for Korea. I was levied out for the Far East. And the Korean War intervened while I was at the Overseas Replacement Center in Seattle, Washington. And
That was just like 2 days after you got there.
2 days after I got there, Korean War broke out, and people were starting to, after about a week or so of that, reading in the paper about the atrocities the North Koreans were committing, people were starting to look on servicemen as something to be desired again. And but after a week or two there, we got not levied out. They shipped us all to the Fort Lewis, Washington, where we were brought into the 2nd Division, and I into the 2nd Signal Company.
And that's who you went with to Korea?
And I went to Korea with them, yes.
Okay, so tell us about going to Korea. How did you get there? I think you actually know the boat. You remember the boat?
Yeah, I went on the Billy Mitchell. Billy Mitchell was a Air Force hero of the time between World War I and World War II, and a hero of World War I. I went over on it, and it was pretty good. And we were on the ship with the 503rd Field Artillery. That was one of the different elements that was on the ship, the 503rd, which is Charlie Rangel's, the representative from New York City.
Mm-hmm.
He was a member of the 503rd Field Artillery. Whether he was on the ship at that time or not, I don't know, because I think this is just one company of the 503rd, or one battery of the 503rd that was on us. But we were on the ship, and we were in the forward end of the ship, which is normally reserved for the brig, and which was pretty good because we had a little like a day room and a water cooler, and they didn't know we were there, so we weren't on the KP list. So we rode the ship like tourists.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, how long? Do you remember how long the trip was?
Oh, I think it was about 13 days.
13 days from
Yeah.
Seattle to Korea.
Yeah.
Okay. So once you arrived in Korea, what happened? As you disembarked from the ship? And
Yeah, we went. When we disembarked in Busan, and I remember there was a sign painted off one of the wharfs opposite of us, and it said no smoking. But the Koreans have a phonetic alphabet, so the smoking was SMO space KING. So it was kind of humorous. I'd heard about it from people that had been there before, but yeah, we spent the night on the pier, then loaded on trucks, and went up towards Mariang, which was the rear echelon. I guess it was the rear base for the 2nd Division, or actually probably the 24th, because we relieved the 24th Infantry Division. We went up there, but on the way up, we were traveling in convoy. The sniper starts taking shots at us. Well, it took a shot. And of course, the vehicles all came to a screeching halt, and we dove off the side. And one or two guys ended up in a rice paddy, which in August of 1950 was not a good place to be, because they stink.
Yeah.
And we finally ended up getting to Mariang. We were there getting situated, getting ready to relieve the 24th. And when we did finally assume the line, the North Koreans made a push. We were on what was called the Busan perimeter, and the Busan perimeter was anchored on the, not anchored on, but was delineated on one front by the Nakhtang River, and I guess the Nakhtang kind of bulged into North Korean territory, so to speak. It had a bend in the river that bent away from us instead of towards us, and the North Koreans tried to. Well, we were scheduled to jump off and cross the Naktung to eliminate that bulge, but the North Koreans came first, and so that was the first battle of the Naktung Bulge.
And when you say you were scheduled to jump off, were you? What do you mean by that? Were you airborne?
No.
Okay.
We had moved up to a place where they wanted us to be, so that when we crossed the Naktung, we would be there. So I was on something called a jump team, and we went ahead of the rest of the company. What we did is division would set up communications, and they had communications in the division main, division rear. Well, when the echelon forward, they had to have some place to go. So we would, as the jump team, we would go forward, set up a new CP for the division. The division would move into that CP, and then we'd prepare to echelon forward again. And so that's what we were doing. There were, given to whatever we were going to do, but there was as many as 90 of us in that jump team on occasion. And so we were there, and the North Koreans came south, so we had to move back to our original location. And that was sometime in the middle of August. We hadn't been in Korea very long. Sometime in the middle of August. And so then again, one more time, we echeloned forward. We were along a road that was, I guess it was a main line, not main line, it was a main supply route.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved up on that. There was 90 of us again in that group, and we were again going to cross the Naktung. The North Koreans jumped the gun, and they came south, and we were all buttoned up and ready to move forward. And that was the 31st of August. The 31st of August to the 1st of September, there were some bloody battles, and about 3 guys in the division earned a Congressional Medal of Honor in that period of time. And we were, as I said, about 90 of us, we were temporarily cut off from the rear.
So they had encompassed around you.
Yeah, or threatened to. I'm not sure which way it went, but they put a whole bunch of us. The team I was with, they sent us up into the hill, into this valley, on either side of a hill, to dig in, and from that valley was coming the infantrymen who had been routed, and they were coming out and getting on the vehicles and being brought back to division perimeter to establish a new line of defense. And we were supposed to stay there and dig in and stop these North Koreans. And there were 90 of us, as I said. There were 60 vehicles So that meant they were going to evacuate the vehicles, but we were going to stay there.
While the forward infantry guys were coming through you and going
Yeah.
behind you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And your signal, what were these 90? Were these 90 guys their signal? And
Yeah,
what other type of
signal,
was it
all
signal?
all signal,
Wow.
all signal. Yeah. So.
Were you a little concerned?
Yeah, but then they decided no, we wouldn't go back. We wouldn't stay. We'd go back, and we went back. We called back into the company CP area, and it kind of looked like they were going to leave us there because the company commander we had turned yellow, and we came back out. He was screaming at us about where you guys been. We've been waiting for you, you know, that kind of stuff. And that's all I knew at that time. Later on, when I was back in the States, I met the division signal officer who had been the officer in charge of a lot of these jump exercises we were on. And he told me that this company commander was so broken up by his own, for his own safety, that he broke down in the CP and was crying like a baby.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they evacuated him to Japan, and he went back home. But we loaded up in our vehicles and we were moving south and along the highway back to our original location, and somebody had mortars zeroed in on the highway. We were coming down, and we were going down there and thought we were going to get mortared, but by the time we got to there, some of the vehicles, I guess, had been hit by mortars or something, or close to it, mortar shells. But by the time we got there, they had lifted the fire. But on the way up there, they had artillery emplacements dug in. They had revetments on the sides of the hills.
The North Koreans?
No, our artillery.
Oh, okay.
Our artillery. They had the revetments built in, and they had the guns almost firing vertically to get the elevation, to get the distance they needed. But I don't know. I don't know if they ever used them. They probably didn't get a chance to. But we got back to our position down where we had started off from. We had twice tried to cross the Nakhtong and got sent back home again. And so we knew that the Marines were going to land at Pusan, at Incheon. We knew they were going to. They were supposed to have landed the 1st of September, but they didn't because the 1st Marine Brigade was assigned to 8th Army, and 8th Army needed them to contain this North Korean advance. So they were pulled out, and they were sent to go with the rest of the 1st Marine Division and make the invasion of Incheon. And they and the 7th Infantry Division did that. And we waited there from 1st of September. There was a lot of battles going on. A lot of snipers into our area. The flak wagons at night, the quad 50s on a half track, would go up and down the highways, hosing down the hills with 50 caliber fire because of the snipers and infiltrators. There was a lot of one-way defiles on the highways, and the MPs they had MPs at at the north end, the south end of those defiles to control the traffic going through, and they stayed there 24 hours a day, and they were very subject to North Korean guerrillas. Some guerrillas came into we had the radio relay sites on the tops of the hills, and 8th Army had one in our area. And the guerrillas went up onto this, and they killed all but one of the team. There's 7 or 8 guys. They murdered them all. One guy would manage to not escape, but play dead, I guess. But there was a lot of that. A lot of snipers, a lot of atrocities. But then on the 16th of September, after the Marines landed on the 15th, we finally did manage to cross the Nakhtong. And when we crossed the Nakhtong, I remember we passed this one hillside, and it was obviously a lot of dirt had been pushed over the hill by bulldozers, and there was a big sign on it. This is not an Allied burial ground. This is enemy dead. And there was arms and there was legs sticking out of the side of the hill.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we went on up, heading towards Seoul. We made stops along the way, and as we went to this one village, Cheongju, where the North Koreans had murdered all the key personnel of the city, the mayor, all the elected officials, the school teachers, the intellectuals. They murdered them, and they were in their bodies in a mass grave with their hands tied behind their back. And we went along. We had a humorous event. We went through this one village, and all the Koreans, we yelled "Manzai, Manzai." That's their version of bonsai. They were all greeting us and waving us, happy to see us. And we stopped in this one village. Most of the villages were on, alongside the roads, and there was this theater that had obviously been built by the Japanese, and it had a urinal in it. And we hadn't seen something like that since we left the transport. And the urinal had no pipes connected to it. They must have had a coolie or somebody sitting there, Japanese the way they were. But anyway, everybody lined up on that. And, we had a small flood, but everybody used the urinal.
Simple pleasures when you go without a lot.
Yeah. And we went on up and got to a place called Suwon. That was south of Seoul, and we bivouacked that night in a match factory. And then we went into Seoul. And where did we go first? We were in half a dozen places in Seoul in total, but we didn't cross into Seoul. We stayed in this suburb of Seoul on the south side of the Han River called Yangdong-po. And we were in there. We were on the side of a hill looking down, and we were in this small village, and we were bivouacked, and division headquarters, I don't know where it was, but things were pretty well tuning down then. Everybody was congratulating themselves. MacArthur got a medal, and
MacArthur, you said?
Yeah. And we were even standing retreat, and we'd stand retreat. We had to face the division headquarters where the flag would be lowered, and they would send a bugler up to play retreat for us, and we'd stand there saluting with our hands, in a regular hand salute, and the Koreans would be standing there looking to see what we were shading our eyes so that we could, what we were looking at, because we were shading our eyes to see. And we were there a few days, and we were in a radio station that hadn't been made operational yet, and then they moved us out. I guess we were getting ready to jump off into North Korea. They moved us out to a little place down right in the main part of Yeongdong-po. It was a wall cantonment area that had been built by the Japanese, and it had been used by the 24th Corps during the occupation of Korea before the Korean War started. And we were there, and we were already washing the vehicles, getting everything cleaned up. The guys were, in order to make the vehicles shine, they put kerosene in the water and then washing the vehicles would shine, and that was significant. We were going to have a victory parade in Seoul or something, I don't know what it was. The 24th Division, the 1st Cav, they were all from Japan. They all said they were going back to Japan, and everything was, the thing was over. So Sigmund Rhee sent his divisions across the 38th parallel. They were going to wash their swords in the Yalu River. And they went forward, and of course we had to follow because they didn't have artillery. The American divisions would supply the South Korean divisions with artillery support, and so we went across the 38th parallel, and there was a big sign there when we went across that said, "You are crossing the 38th parallel, courtesy of the 1st Cavalry Division," and we all laughed at that, but that's the way it was. They said they were first in Manila, first in Tokyo, first on the parallel, first into Pyongyang, and all that kind of stuff. But we went forward, and that business with the kerosene and the water washing the vehicles, that became like an adhesive, because the roads in Korea were all dusty. And after a little while, our vehicles were the same color as the roads, which probably wasn't a bad idea. But we went on up. I don't remember what the intermediate stops we made between Seoul, but I don't think we went on straight through. But I can't remember. But we did end up in Pyongyang. And I, being part of that jump team, was part of a group called Task Force Indian Head that was put together to get into Pyongyang, and there were already airborne troops there, and the 1st Cav was there, and so we were in the Pyongyang. I was among the first, not the first, but among the first. And we were there. We finally ended up, we were bivouacked in a large building that had been some sort of a military academy. There were trenches, and there were all kinds of ammunition. I guess there was ammunition for every gun ever manufactured in those trenches, from dum-dum bullets of World War I to current stuff. And so we're in Pyongyang, and then then we were, somehow or another we got into another building that was a propaganda mill with printing presses and all these magazines that the Soviets put out that extolling the virtues of life in Russia. And so we were in that building, and we spent 4 or 5 days a week, I don't know, in Pyongyang, and we were finding things like Russian cigarettes that were more cardboard tube than they were tobacco, and
So from
Pyongyang we moved forward again. We moved forward again. I don't know what the name of the town was. It was a mining village. Wait a minute, we moved. Yeah, it was a mining village, and we were in there, and we woke up one morning, and there again was everything streaming past us going south because the Chinese had come in, and they weren't supposed to do that because MacArthur told us we'd be home for Christmas. And that's been denied by so many people, but all of us remember it, home for Christmas. And we had been getting briefings about Chinese prisoners being captured, and they had no intention of fighting us because they were former nationalists and this and that, and they were friends with us. They were just there to protect the hydroelectric plants on the river, but
Chinese.
yeah. But then they came in, and this little village we had an entry out onto the highway, and we saw the division Divadi officers, a brigadier general, second Divadi, and he was turning around these. I guess they were either Corps or Division 155 long toms, the big guns. He was turning them around to go back and fire support because the infantrymen just a few miles up the way were boresighting the 105s and the 155s on the Chinese coming across. And a buddy of mine who was a photographer, he had been with the 1st Marines in Guadalcanal. He came back to get ammunition, and that was the last I ever saw of him. He was taken prisoner, and I saw his name on a list of POWs that the Koreans had, North Koreans, but he was not on the list of names of those who were repatriated. But we were there.
Well, do you remember his name?
I can probably think of it. He was from Boston, and I can't think of it right now. And he and I were pretty good buddies, but there's some of the names I can't remember, some of the names I do. But we were there, and then they decided that everybody was going to be bugging out, but so they sent the jump team south. So we went back to Pyongyang. The jump team did. The rest of the division stayed. The rest of the signal company stayed with the division up on the line. And the 2nd Division fought the rearguard action to allow the 24th, the 25th, and the 1st Cav to be able to withdraw. And we suffered 5,000 casualties, something like that, in a week.
Where was that? That was north of Pyongyang?
Yeah, it was north of Pyongyang, well north. It was on the Chongchang River, which was just a few miles below the Yalu River, just a few miles below the Manchurian border. And
was that in one battle, or was that just over a period of...
it's about a week, I guess, altogether from the time the Chinese came in. I don't even remember what date it was. I know we had had Thanksgiving dinner, so it was after Thanksgiving, and so we moved back to Pyongyang, and a couple of days later, the rest of the company came back. The division came back, and they went through this roadblock called Kunari, and that was a fiasco because the division, the powers that be, the way they set up the order of march, it pretty much once the division was set in motion, there was no more communication between units, between the regiments, battalions, companies, anything else. So it was going down this defile in a place called Kunari. It was 7 miles long of mostly Chinese having target practice at us, and that's where a lot of the casualties occurred.
So the Chinese had selected a section of the route.
Yeah.
And they were on both sides up in the hills? Or?
Yeah, I don't know if they were. I don't think they were on both sides. I wasn't there. I was being in the jump team. I got into some deep doo-doo a couple of times, but this time being on the jump team, I avoided that.
Were you ahead of it, or
we were ahead of it because
you jumped forward before it went
on? Before, and probably I don't know how long after that. I do know. No, yeah, we saw a Jeep. You always, whenever you saw a Jeep with a bullet hole in the windshield in front of it, right in front of the driver, you always wonder about. And there was a Jeep down the end of the defile. We didn't know it was a defile then, but.
So you said that you got into a tight spot?
Yeah. Yeah.
When was that? How did that occur?
Well, the 1st of September when we were supposedly digging in on the hill there, and a couple other times after that. As I said, I was in the Signal Corps, and they paid combat pay to anybody who was under enemy fire for a period of 6 days, 6 consecutive days. And they published a general order to tell pay officers who they could pay combat pay. This was all retroactive. Pay the combat pay to. So in this, the company I was in had, maybe 5 days of enemy fire, maybe, and then go 4 or 5 days a week and have another day. So that would be 6, but they weren't consecutive. And we had a few things like a couple of days here, a day there, but nothing. Only I think once or twice do we have 6 consecutive days. And I don't remember those days.
No?
No. That I got the combat pay for 1 or 2 months, I forgot which. And in the first part of the Korean War there, in the Pusan perimeter, and on up to North Korea, it didn't matter what you were in. And I don't remember whether it was on the way back from the north. Well, on the way back, this is something. We were coming out of Pyongyang, the division, what was left of it. We were coming out of Pyongyang, and there was a road. There were 2 roads that converged. One came from back up where we were through Kunari, and the other one came from a town called Sinanju. And part of the division was sent through Sinanju as an escape route, and they suffered no casualties whatsoever. Those that came through the road that led through Coonery had severe casualties. Everybody had casualties, but there were no casualties on the return route for the guys that came through St. Andrew. When we got to that intersection, those two roads, if the North Koreans or the Chinese had used the Air Force, we'd have been in sorry problems, because there was the whole division converging on this one fork in the road. And you could look back from where we were, we could look back and we could see vehicles piled up behind us. We could see them in front of us, and we could see them off to the right coming in from the other direction. And we got down to this place where they established a assembly point for the division, where all the troops would assemble and try to figure out what happened and who it happened to. And the company I was in, the Sealing Company, had a pretty well intact mess, I guess, so they set up a mess to feed the division. And it was probably not the only one, there were probably others. Yeah. And we was in this area. The mess hall was, well, it wasn't a mess hall, it was just the cooks with a mess fly, and you had your canteen, they had to wash water and all that. And we were eating, and everybody was coming through. They were getting a meal. It wasn't much. I went once and got baked beans. I went the second time and got canned string beans. But the thing was, it was very poignant. Very, they'd have, you used the bottom of C-ration boxes to make signs of, like, latrine closed 9, 12, 50, and something like that, or CP so-and-so here. You made posters or signs on the back, on the bottom of the C-ration cartons, and there were some lined up. They had signs up like 2nd Recon Company, and there might be 4 guys in one of their recon vehicles. Another sign saying Item Company 9th Infantry, or this, and it was pathetic. You'd see it, and there hardly anybody there. It was really.
How big was your division initially, and what was it down to at this point?
Well, I don't know what it was. We had 1,000 casualties. I never knew, but a division was probably around 15 to 18,000 men, possibly more. And
so a third.
Yeah.
Close to a third.
Yeah.
You say casualties, that's wounded and killed.
And missing in action.
Missing.
Yeah, there were a lot of guys taken prisoner. And coming through the Coonery roadblock, the driver for the division signal officer was going through, and he got hit in the head by a bullet, went through his helmet, knocked. They thought he was dead. They didn't check too close, and they dumped him out on the side of the road. Not the division signal officer, this sad sack sergeant. And they dumped him out on the side of the road, and he revived. And fortunately, he was probably dazed and so on, because the bullet had gone through his helmet, and he wasn't wearing a helmet liner. He was wearing his helmet over a pile cap, and the bullet went in the helmet. It traversed the helmet on the inside, following the contour of the inside of the helmet, and cut that pile cap completely in. It cut a path through the pile cap. And,
really?
And he had his own personal pistol. and it was an Army issue. And the driver that dumped him out, I mean, the guy that was riding with, dumped him out of the Jeep, had the presence of mind to take his pistol, not to check to see how he was. But he came running back, and he got back. He was okay. He wasn't severely injured, but that happened quite a bit. Guys getting wounded and declared dead, and
Really?
and they were, they were, at least they recovered and were in hospital in Japan or something like that. This one other instance I know of, but this fella here, he was really angry, and I can't say that I blame him. And 3 of his good buddies were all victims of casualties, and yeah, but we got there. We settled down for that night after the meal, and I unrolled my bedroll under a ton trailer, baggage trailer, and slept on the ground, and woke up the next morning, put my hand out, and there was the snow, the first snow we had seen. At the same time we were going through this, the Marines were on the other side of the Tabak Mountains. They were going through what they went through. They had all the snow. They got all the snow, I guess. But we then hot-footed it back to Seoul, went across the river to Yongdong-po. We fought the rearguard action, so we took quite a beating. But the other division, the 24th, the 25th, and the 1st Cav, I guess they went up, but they stayed on the, not up north, but they came south and stayed on the line.
Oh, okay.
And we got back to Seoul, and I guess the new year, 1951, we were refitted and re-equipped and new people, and we were back up on the line again. And that was a series of taking hills.
Any more major battles after that?
Oh, there were a lot of major battles. There's Chip Yong Ni and Twin Tunnels, but the way it was set up, there wasn't a lot of movement involved, so we just ran normal tasks as the jump team. We did move a few times, yeah.
Were you a part of any of the ensuing battles from that point forward, or?
No.
Well, how did you stay in touch with your family back home?
Well, had the mail, had the letters, yeah. And when things were going badly, like up north, when we were up north and no mail was getting out, we had heard that they had a whole freight car load of mail that they couldn't deliver, so they destroyed it. So it was approaching Christmas time, so there's probably a lot of Christmas cake and things like that. Yeah, I had an aunt used to send me occasionally. She was in New York. She'd send me the New York newspapers, and one time she sent me a loaf of Jewish rye bread. She hollowed it out and put a fifth of whiskey in it and sent it to me.
You were a popular guy there for a little bit, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, the rye bread was hot as a rock. We ate the rye bread and sipped the whiskey.
So I would imagine you probably felt quite a bit of stress and pressure
Yeah.
during your time in Korea. How did you handle that? Did you have any special techniques or methods you used to try and
When
keep
I
cool?
look back on it, look back on it. At the time, I was scared. At the time, yeah. But now I look back on it. I did what I was supposed to do. I did my duty. I didn't run. No, I uh, I wasn't a combat soldier. As they say, as they said, shot at and missed and shit at and hit.
Did you have the opportunity to see any USO shows? Did they have any going on? And
Well, yeah, they had a few. Al Jolson was there in the Pusan perimeter, and he was in there, and it was pretty ticklish because the Pusan perimeter wasn't very large, and he came there. He was the first one. We saw when we were waiting for whatever was supposed to happen in Seoul. Bob Hope came, and I saw Bob Hope in Seoul, and there are a lot of these little USO teams. If you ever watch MASH, occasionally they have MASH had a program where they have a couple of girls that danced and a guy that told jokes and an accordion player and something. They put on a small show, and they were probably they were great because they were there, and if you went to see Bob Hope, the whole division was there, and you couldn't see much. You could hear them because they had a loudspeaker, but these other shows, they were more intimate, and the people that I give them a lot of credit. They would come in there. And Red Cross, I didn't see the Red Cross until I got back to Sasebo, Japan, going home. But the Salvation Army, it was a war movement, so they couldn't move too far, too fast, or stay with us too much. But they were at Division Rear, which was a good place to be because if you needed something from home, you needed a chaplain or something, you went to Division Rear. Salvation Army was there. We had quite a few guys, 3 or 4, killed accidentally. We had one guy committed suicide.
What did you think of? You spent 20 years in the Army. What did you think of the officers and the enlisted? Did you get along with all the officers pretty well? Or?
After a while, in Korea, the platoon leader we had, we never saw him very much. He made captain. The rest of us didn't make anything. He was okay, but we had 4 company commanders, and like I said, the first one in the States, he was gung-ho and everybody liked him, but when it came to shove, he turned chicken. And we had 3 other company commanders. I don't even know what happened to them, but I do know one. We were on a road march, and we'd gotten lost, and I don't know if he was responsible or who was, but somebody asked, can we have some chow, sea rations or something. No, I couldn't do that, but he was sitting there heating sea rations on the hot engine, on his hot Jeep engine. Well, we couldn't eat. Yeah. So I don't know what happened to him. I don't know what happened to the other 2 either. I don't even know their names.
Yeah.
But officers later on, the officers at 3rd Army headquarters, they were all decent guys. in the signal school at Fort Gordon when I went there. All of us staff in the school were Korean vets, and some of the officers were, but most of them weren't. But they were the ones I was involved with were good guys, decent. I told you before, the former signal officer came through. He was the IG. He was the Inspector General, and he was coming through and checking. We were just starting to get these schools off the ground because of buildup. They were moving stuff from Monmouth, expanding Monmouth down to Fort Gordon, and the officer in charge, Captain Coburn, came in with Colonel Bruner, who had been the signal officer, and I was in the building, the old supply room, doing some carpentry work, and I didn't have my shirt, my blouse on, my jacket on. He came in and he saw me, and we started talking, and that's when he told me about the company commander. And after he left, the OIC came out and said to me, "I'm glad you knew that guy. He was really burning my tail."
So, was there, did you have any type of homecoming when you came home from Korea, or?
When we got to Seattle, we were the first troop ship to hit returnees to come into Seattle. And they loaded us on trucks, and we went up the main drag in Seattle, and the people were all out waving and hurrah and this and that. And, they welcomed us and said hello, which was nice. And we got back to, can't think of the name, Camp something or other. I can't think of the name of it now, but we got back there and they processed it, and we were going. We were going the next day. Yeah, we coming back from Japan, from Korea. We came across from Busan on a Japanese ferry boat, and we slept on the deck on tatami mats. Got to Sasebo. They loaded us on trucks and took us up through Sasebo, and they gave us a pretty decent welcome there. And we got to the camp, and we processed there for, I don't know, maybe a week or so, I'm not sure. I left the division the 23rd of May. I know that because that was an end date for one of the battles of the Korean War that I participated in. There were 10 battle stars issued for the Korean War for a 3-year period of time. I earned the first 5.
Really?
I and everybody else that was there with me. So, and
So after you went on and you went ahead and completed 20 years of service.
yeah, but I'm going to tell you about the troop ship coming back.
Oh, yes.
It was a converted Victory ship. And there were 1,200 of us on that thing. And they gave us 2 meals a day. And it took us 15 or some odd days to go across the Pacific. I'm glad it wasn't stormy. And we landed in Seattle, Washington. As I said, and yeah, when we got to Seattle, they had can girls there on the dock and dancing, and they gave us pretty good fireboats in the harbor, spraying water. Yeah, it was a pretty good welcome.
And what year was this?
1951, June of 1951. And that's quite a bit of difference between coming home from World War II or Korea, you came on a troop ship. A lot of times you came with guys you'd served with, which in my case was about 10 of us. You came back, you unwound in a replacement center waiting for the ship to bring you back. Then on the ship was endless card games and crap games. You unwound. Vietnam, the guys were in combat one day and on the plane the next day and home the third day. And it was probably a hard thing to take, I know.
Yeah. Well, after you got back to the States, anything significant happen after that throughout your career? What was left?
Well, I left there and went, got a 30-day furlough and went home and came up here and went stay with my wife's folks in Atlanta, and I went back to I went reported into
Fort Gordon?
Well, Fort Gordon, but I went into a reception center where all of us, there was a whole flock of us, had been on various ships coming into San Francisco, coming into Seattle, a whole bunch of us. Can't think, it was a camp right outside Columbia, South Carolina. But I went there and then went to Fort Gordon. Went back to Korea a second time in '62, and this time again I'm stationed in Seoul in the 304th Signal Battalion and 57 Signal Company, and I am NCOIC of maintenance for the 8th Army Comm Center, and that included teletype and crypto and the I don't know how to put it, carrier repeaters, the people that provided the means of communication, radio link-ups and those kinds of things. But I was mainly with the teletype and crypto. And the company I was in also operated a fifth echelon crypto repair shop, and I was in charge of it also. So I let other people run that.
It was a different career then.
Yeah, it was. And First Sergeant, he and I were good buddies. He had been in the 5th Cavalry Regiment of the First Cavalry Division. He and I were there at the same time. And so we traveled around. We used to, on Sunday, he had a Jeep being First Sergeant, and we'd go to the PX and buy up a whole bunch of candy and go up into the hills and give candy to the kids.
So after your second trip to Korea, was that a 6-month tour or 1 year?
13 months.
13 months.
Yeah.
Then you returned to the States to finish out your Army career.
Yeah. Went to Fort Monmouth.
And you retired after 20 years.
Yeah.
Do you remember why did you retire after 20? Why did you not stay longer, or could you stay longer?
Oh, I could have stayed longer. I passed a promotion to retire. I didn't like Fort Monmouth.
No.
I didn't I didn't like it. I could do the work. I'd rather do the work than teach somebody else how to do it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I was the best instructor in the world anyway. Nowhere near it, but I was ready to retire, and there were jobs available. I came back home here, went back to the shipyard to work as a technical writer.
As a technical writer?
Yeah. Here I am, a retired Master Sergeant, Signal Corps, writing technical manuals on submarines. Submarines and their equipment and their systems. And, yeah.
Did you go to school at all after you retired from the Army?
No.
You just came home and went
Yeah.
back to work?
Yeah.
Do you have any? Did you maintain any friendships from your Army days? Did you keep track of anybody or?
My wife used to keep track and write to people. I was never much of a writer, but some friends of ours that had been with us in Germany, he and his family from Oklahoma, they came out to see us once, and but I didn't see too many people.
Well, Ed, how do you think your military experience influenced your life after you retired? Do you think there was a big influence, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. I went to work at Electric Boat, and most of the guys I worked with were retired chiefs who had served in submarines during World War II, and there was a camaraderie, something like being in the service. You had shared experience. They may not have been exactly alike, but and I used to tell them they hired me to work with you chiefs. They wanted to add some class to the place. But, yeah, they were all good buddies, and a lot of them, been through some terrible things during the war on the submarines. Yeah.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
No.
VFW or?
No, I haven't joined it. Oh, I did join the Second Division Association, but VFW and the American Legion I haven't joined. I've been thinking about it. It's getting kind of late, but I've been thinking about it.
Well, is there anything you'd like to add that we have not covered?
Well, you asked me how the experience helped. That the Army gave me an education in communications and electronics, and when I went to work at Electric Boat, it was an entirely new environment to me, a new things. I mean, but I learned fast, and I had my background. I could understand. I could understand the theories and so forth of what was going on with this stuff I was working on. I was dealing with hydraulics, pneumatics, and electronic systems. So,
Well, Ed, I want to thank you for your service, and I want to thank you for giving me the time to do this interview with you today.
okay, you're welcome. I'm glad to do it.